Mark LaCourciere is the president of the Achievement Center and has led the organization for over 10 years. During this time, he has learned a lot about how businesses use opinions to collect data to drive decisions. We hope you will find these insights interesting and helpful for your own business. Mark is going to share about that process today and give us some insights about how these tools can help your business. Welcome, Mark.
We are, we focus in areas related to people development. And so I tell you that because when we talk about data, we're interested in ways that organizations collect predominantly opinions. It's not just opinions, but predominantly opinions, and how that leads to data. And in turn, how that data allows you to make decisions that are more fact-based and less on emotion. We all know the danger of emotion, right? Our examples will cover areas like business planning, hiring, employee engagement, coaching, and other related things. So we'll cover a lot of topics in a short amount of time. The other thing I want to tell you is that I'm going to try to, do this in a time frame that will allow for a reasonable amount of interaction at the end. We have lots of great participants here today who themselves will bring a lot of business experience to the party, and so you may have great insights to share with the group. And this isn't about me, this is about you and about each other. So feel free, if you've got some questions that you want to throw up in the throw into the chat window, and we'll make sure that we cover them off either during the session or post session. One way or the other, we'll make sure that we respond to all questions. Okay, so let's move on. One thing you are going to find is as I was doing a fair bit of research on this whole idea around data and preparing for today, the numerous great quotes that I came across. I mean, who would have thought that data is such a passionate topic, right? Surely it's got to be one of the most boring things. Well, apparently not to the data geeks or the data heads. And so Jim Barksdale, former Netscape CEO, he says, if we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, then let's go with mine. And I thought that was a pretty cute comment because, a lot of times as business leaders, that's what we tend to do. We tend to get mired in our own opinions. And for those of you that don't know who Netscape is, if you're not as old as me, there was a time when Netscape ruled the world in terms of internet browsers, and I'm old enough to remember my Netscape browser on my computer. So I thought that might be a cute one to start with. Now, on a more somber note, here's an example of data and the consequences of data. I'm going to assume that everybody recognizes this picture. And these people represent the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger, one of two shuttles that unfortunately exploded. And Challenger was the one that exploded on takeoff. And I think it was Columbia that exploded on reentry. So they've had some terrible events occur. This one, though, the reason I focused in on this one is I've always drawn upon this example as a great example that we as business leaders can use when we're talking about the importance of data, and more importantly, the importance of not ignoring data. For those that don't recall, this one was traced back to a tiny little O-ring, like a $2 part that was somewhere in the fuel cell, and they knew about it. They were aware of it, and they had unfortunately dismissed it. They felt that it was such a small risk. They said it's a 1 in 100,000 chance of shuttle failure for any given launch. And so poor statistical reasoning led to the launch happening, and 7 people lost their lives. So it was a terrible tragedy that could have been prevented with data that was right in front of them. So data is an important thing, and we ignore it at our peril. Here's another quote. I told you I was going to throw a few of them out, this one is one of my favorites. It was an important one when I launched my business career at the Achievement Center. It was an interesting marketing strategy we used. I didn't invent it; somebody else had used it, and it was a fun marketing thing. We used to go around and deliver apple pies to business owners. Long story, I won't get into it, but led to a massive project for us very early in my career with the Achievement Center. And it was this quote. It was such a fun thing. George Bernard Shaw is attributed to having said this. And, the idea that if I have an apple and you have an apple and we trade apples, we'll both have an apple, right? So we both have, I said 2 apples in error there. We'll both have an apple each is really what I should have said. But if I have an idea and we both trade ideas, we now have 2 ideas in totality. Sorry, there's a typo there. It's debatable whether this quote was actually said by George Bernard Shaw, but that doesn't really matter. It's still a great quote from someone. And why am I saying this? Because my thinking is that when we share opinions, we share data. When we share data, we're better together. We can make decisions that are more based on fact, based on logic, less on emotion. There's better opportunity for us to get to objective decision making. And that's what I want to talk about today. So let's talk a bit about collecting data. So what do we do? Well, I know that we've got folks on this call that are in the data collection business, so I'm speaking to the converted here a little bit. But first, we got to kind of decide what is it that we want to collect. So that's pretty important. Then we want to think about things like time frame. What sort of time frame are we looking at to collect this information? And then the method is critical. And so we need to decide, well, how? Is it going to be questionnaire? Is it going to be, conversations with people? Is it going to be confidential surveys? What system are you going to use? Then you actually do it. You've got your actual collection of data. And then we analyze the data, which is the hypercritical, usually most time-consuming part, decide what it all means, and then hopefully we take action on it. Too many times we collect data and don't take appropriate action on it. So we need to make a commitment in terms of what we plan to do. Now, pretty much everything we're going to focus on today is going to be opinion-based. We're not going to do too much that is more sort of we're not going to measure how fast you complete an exercise or solve a puzzle or whatever. We're talking more about the soft skills world, where which is the famous quote, hard is soft and soft is hard. So hard is soft, things like financials and things like that. Hard is soft because you can change that stuff. You can reforecast, you can do those things. But soft is hard. What does that mean? Well, You can, you certainly can devote attention to investing in people, soft skills, but it's hard stuff to do. It's hard to change behavior. It's hard to do that kind of stuff. Opinions all of a sudden become a really big deal. So we're zeroing in on this whole idea of opinion-based, soft skills focused stuff. Another couple of cute quotes that I thought I'd throw in, because the one on the left is somebody who is probably one of the most famous people when it comes to data. He was the father of continuous quality improvement and a statistician who believed management decisions should be driven by data. So you think of the Toyota production system, and you think of so much that we have today related to quality. Deming was the godfather of a lot of this, and so cute quote by him. The one on the right I thought was an interesting quote, because he says things get done only if the data we gather can inform and inspire those in a position to make a difference. And I couldn't help but take this one back to this whole idea of the challenger. And so there's a great example of, okay, you've got data, and okay, it could inform us, but were we inspired to do anything with it? So we have to be prepared to take action. This guy's a high school teacher. We're not talking about somebody who changed industry, but I thought it was a really great quote. Let's talk a little bit about margin of error. When we're getting into collecting data, it's a little bit, it'd be a little bit disingenuous to not talk about margin of error. And anybody who spends any time on this stuff knows that we have to think about that opinion-based data isn't 100% perfect. Things get in the way. So just for fun, I'm using a margin calculator here. It's actually available on the web. If anybody wants access to this tool, I can send you the URL. It's a really quick and dirty tool for margin of error calculations. And so here's a fun one. The approximate population of the planet today. How many people, not the planet, the country today, and how many people are there? And then if we wanted to survey all of them, what confidence level do we want? 95%. What margin of error do we want? 5%. The white boxes you can change. Okay, so we've got the Canadians, the confidence level we want, the margin of error we want, and we hit calculate, and it will tell us, well, how many people would we have to survey? We would only have to survey about 385 to get a decent confidence level and a decent margin of error. Now, obviously, if you want a smaller margin of error, for instance, your sample size is going to go up accordingly. So this is kind of a cool little calculator that we can use. Now, if we went on, though, that's great if we were, surveying the country, but we don't often survey the country, do we? So most of us here on this call have been involved in some kind of a survey in our companies or whatever. And we do a lot of this. So now what if we want to survey a company that has 100 employees? Okay, well, we got a company that has 100 employees. We want the same kind of confidence level, the same kind of margin of error. The calculator would tell us that we need a sample size of 80. So if we were doing an engagement survey, for instance, and we wanted to get a really decent idea of, how accurate these numbers are, well, we would need about 80% of the staff to respond to get that level of confidence and at that margin of error. Now, do we always get 80%? Sometimes we get more. Sometimes we get into the high 60s or mid 70s. So that's obviously going to have an impact on our confidence level. There's no question about that. What about looking at it a different way? What if we just said, okay, well, you know what? And there's several ways to look at this. One is, what if we set out to, we thought, well, hitting 80 is going to be hard to do. Okay, well, what if we lowered our confidence level and our margin of error? Then we're going to get different numbers. So if I lowered both of them, we're actually, increase the margin of error, and lower the confidence level. Our sample is lower, is what I meant to say, 41. So we've actually cut the sample size in half. We can do that. And so you can look at this a couple of different ways. You could say, okay, well, I wanted that confidence level of 95. I wanted a margin of error of 95%. I wanted 80 people to respond in order to get that, but I only got 40, 50, 60, whatever. So now at least it gives you a sense that you've ended up at some number between your target number and whatever reality you got. So I strongly suggest using a tool like this when you're doing organizational surveys, for instance, to just what kind of confidence level can you have? Let's go on and talk about something else now. I want to talk about something, this whole idea of cognitive bias. There's a lot of stuff right now going on in this area, some pretty neat stuff. And, a couple of things. First of all, if we lack data, we've spent a lot of time talking about data. If we lack data or we use it improperly, then other decision factors come into play. Okay, so we'll get into bias. I would go so far as to say there is no decision made without bias. We're human beings. We all have, call it an agenda, call it whatever, we're all influenced by stuff. It's part of our DNA. We, cultural things and all kinds of things, we have biases. But we hope we can, we can manage it if we are self-aware. When we collect opinions and have enough of them to feel there is statistical relevance, it does help us to make those better decisions. Back to my margin of error conversations. But even still, there are biases for which we have to be careful. And I want to talk about some of them. I've got some really interesting data on that. So what are some examples? Well, this first one, and these come from an article from Psychology Today, a few years old now, but the research is still the research. And the Dunning-Kruger effect, what is that? Well, the more I know, the less I realize what I don't know. But the contra argument to that is the more cautious I become. So there's a bit of a sort of a circle argument going on there. That's one type. Confirmation bias, we favor the ideas that support what we believe, very common. Often, what's kind of fun about this one is we go to the web looking for data that supports that bias. And you know how the web is these days. You can find anything you want on the web that will support any argument you want. So confirmation bias is a crazy one these days. And I have to confess, I catch myself doing that too. The next one is, we bask in our success. So we're happy to take credit for the examples that make us look good, but we're very quick to deflect things that go wrong. We call that an external locus of control. This isn't our doing. These are things that have nothing to do with us. Heuristics. So, heuristics are like shortcuts we take in our own decision making based on our own learning and assumptions. Part of it's a life skill. You're saying, look, I don't want to reinvent the wheel all the time. But part of this is a risk. Because heuristics mean that we're assuming that because it was right last time, it will be right the next time. And that has risk attached to it. The curse of knowledge bias, once we know it, we assume that we and others knew it all along, and we function, on that basis. Again, what was true before may not be true again. The in-group bias is the tendency to support like-minded people. It creates a lack of objectivity, but I'm sure none of us do that, right? So group thinking, I like to call it. We all are guilty of that. I had to include this one. This one got added this morning. What an interesting bit of timing that there was a fantastic article in Fortune magazine this morning. Some of it, respectfully, is a repeat, but a lot of it's not. So I wanted to throw this in because what's it all about? Well, most of us or at least a lot of us on this call, manage employees. And what's on our mind right now? Return to work. Do we want them back in the office? Do we not want them in the office? Do we want them partially in the office? All these things going on. Companies are going through so much turmoil right now around this whole hybrid model versus not hybrid model. There is a strong preference on the part of leaders, just based on some data. Again, go to the net and find out whatever version of the data supports your thinking. But I have seen a lot of CEO studies suggesting that leaders want to have employees returning to work in their offices full time. But there are similarly strong sentiments from employees for a hybrid model. So we have a big poll going on right now, if you believe some of the research. And so here are some examples. Google recently backtracked on its return to work plans. It was a complete mess because they said we want people in the office, and it created all kinds of turmoil for them. So they've backtracked. Apple is facing strong opposition, and they've had a lot of people leave the company because of it, because they want people back in the office. And so, clearly this is a big deal right now. And we know there are lots of companies that have gone completely in the other direction as well. So talking about some more types of bias that just came up from some other researchers this morning: status quo bias, a desire to go back to what was normal before. Okay, this is something that leaders are being accused of because this is what they always knew. As a matter of fact, they're resisting doing studies to collect data because they're saying, well, we don't need that. We already kind of know. Status quo bias, you see. Anchoring bias is pretty much the same idea, feeling anchored to our initial experiences and information. We won't go out and collect anything new based on changing circumstances. I won't talk about confirmation bias because I already did. It just came up in a second study here. False consensus effect. Falsely believe that others think like us more so than is actually the case. Then we have the the idea that when we have a perception of how systems should work, we will ignore other possible functions. Okay. Then we, just to sort of the idea of functional fixedness, where we aren't open to to looking at other possibilities. He said, and this is the bottom line though, he said that we need to use research-based strategies to overcome our gut reactions, causing us to fall victim to mental oversights. So it's kind of like, he stole my opinions to data to decisions title here, because that's what he's talking about. Okay, so that's literally hot off the presses this morning. I love it. Now, let's move on. We've done so much talking about, why is data important? And we talked about internally developed data, and some ways we can look at how we develop it, cognitive biases we've got to be careful of. But let's look at some third-party data and talk a little bit about, ways in which data can be derived from other sources. We don't have to invent our own surveys all the time. There are great things going on out there. Another good quote, this guy was the co-developer of the World Wide Web, and he said, when we have all data online, it will be great for humanity. It is a prerequisite to solving many problems that humankind faces. Well, I'd say the jury's still out on that. Let's see if he's right. It's been a while since the web was developed. Let's see if he's right. Great study. Now, this is a year old by Randstad. And remember, we're a learning and development company, so where's my bias? Right here. Okay. They talk about soft skills. Companies across the planet are saying 72% are saying soft skills have been an area of focus. The most common skill needed is adaptability. I certainly would echo that right now. And close behind that one, which has been a forever need, is this whole area of communication. The other thing is a couple of comments. One is that getting the opinions of others leads to data that helps us decide ways we might choose to invest our own dollars. Next, most respondents did feel that they received at least a modest ROI on training. I mention that because one of the hardest things people talk about all the time is the difficulty in evaluating soft skills training. That's always a tricky thing. So it was nice to see a study out there that talks about that. Another one that I quite liked, and near and dear to all of our hearts if we're in the people business, is staffing. Staffing, we're hearing it all the time, right? 96% of business leaders say it's very or somewhat challenging for their company to find skilled professionals. They're a staffing company, right? This is what they're hearing. In this case, we can help. It can help us for making decisions. I call this a problem looking for a solution. Why do I say that? I say that because if this is a reality that all of us as business leaders face, if we could get just a few percent better at it than everybody else over time, we call that slight edge thinking in our business. And slight edge thinking over time doesn't mean you'll be 3% better. Think about it. If you could hire 3 to 5% better than your competitor consistently over time, and you could retain them better than your competitor over time, what a compound impact that will have on the performance of your business over time. So it can become part of your strategy. So it helps us prioritize actions related to attraction and retention. The next one, I want to go through some of these fairly quickly, is the CEO study by PwC Canada. We expect the economy will grow. intend to pursue organic growth. We intend to hire. We intend to invest in leadership and talent. And culture and behaviors are going to be important. So again, this is a highly credible organization providing some great data on directionally good news for all of us in leadership that certainly there's a lot of optimism. We see a lot of growth going on in terms of the economy. We see growth going on in terms of hiring. So there are a lot of positives, with a few little hiccups along the way. So that's good. I'm going to change gears on you now here, and I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. And why do I want to introduce this whole idea of planning, business planning? And this will become apparent in just a minute. But in planning, when you're doing business planning, opinions matter. So if you're going to develop strategic objectives, ideally you want to get the opinions of other people because you want them to buy in and be part of the plan. We know that most businesses fail to plan, which put another way, according to my grade 9 teacher, is planning to fail. So, using financial data, market research, employee opinions would be a much smarter way to start the process. So here's another quote from our friends at Forbes. Start by working out what your business is looking to achieve. Asking opinions, again, is a great way to do that. Just clicking along here to another statistic for you, 20% of business owners have a formal plan. 20%, according to one meaningful study. Think about that. 80% don't have a plan. And only 1 in 3 of these 20% regularly spend time on refining their strategy for growth. And so we also need to think beyond growth and think, well, what other factors are important to a business? We've been talking about attraction and retention, which is the number one issue facing businesses. What other things? But growth alone, which is usually a pretty big issue to business owners, we're not even managing that one. Okay, so this is a big issue for businesses right now. So just another statistic on this whole area, or set of statistics. How well do we plan? Again, you can go to the web and find so much conflicting data on this, but I think this has been pretty consistent over time. 90% of well-formulated strategies failed due to poor execution. So these are, the 1 in 5 that actually put together a plan. 90% of those don't do very well. 30% of those cited a failure to coordinate across units as the single greatest challenge. This does not include that large percentage that had no plan at all. And a study that is not in here, but I'll just mention, a study of CEOs, totally different data here for you, found that a lack of understanding by employees, the employees themselves, in terms of what was expected of them, was cited as one of the top reasons for failure. So we're bringing employees in, we're onboarding them poorly, they don't know what's expected of them, and in the end, they don't execute well. Now, I said that one of the things we can do is get opinions from people as part of our planning process. This is a tool we use a fair bit. It's called CORE. We have core strengths, core strategy. We have a few different versions of this survey tool, but what we do is we collect opinions, and this is a super cheap way to do it. But what you're doing is you've got multiple important categories in terms of how you run your business. You're looking for your own trends. You're identifying and confirming what are the strengths in your business upon which you can leverage. Remember the Gallup books, and they talked about now discover your strengths. It's always easier to build on your strengths. So let's work on that first. But at the same time, we have to be aware of areas for growth and development. If you're really committed to these kinds of things, you start to measure yourself year over year to see where you're making progress and improving. You look at best in class scores. How do you compare in certain questions and categories to other high performing businesses? How do you compare to the average of all companies as well? So we can find that kind of data for companies if they're committed to doing strategy. Now, I'm not trying to sell a survey here, because lots of companies have other data points that they're using to do that. All I'm saying is it's important that you have this if you're committed to business planning. Look at areas of strength, look at areas of development. If you're getting up over a score of 8 in something, we call these engagement drivers, by the way. They don't measure engagement directly. They measure the things that drive engagement, if there's a difference. And so, a score like trust being over 8, that would be considered a good thing. Getting something that's down in the 6s or lower would be considered a not so good thing. So you need to be aware of where you need to zero in as you are building your business plans. So I talked about opinions, data, decisions. So you can see here, we're talking about the data to decisions sort of thinking here as we talk about these kinds of tools. One more thing I will mention to you, that in terms of planning tools like this, is you can also do comparative reporting. So if you're an organization that sees value in slicing your data to say, okay, well, we think we might have certain departments that are performing better than others. We might have seniority. Maybe our younger employees are less engaged than our older ones. Maybe certain branch offices. We're seeing trends. So you can actually do comparative reporting by category in any part of your data, which helps you to zero in on the data as you're making decisions. Other types of surveys, my intention is not to spend a lot of time on these. You can do things like, we're all familiar with 360s, coaching surveys, self-leadership surveys, sales competency surveys. There are lots of different survey tools. I always like to point this out. No one ever scores 100% on these. There's always things you can identify to improve upon. So soft skills surveys like these can be great growth tools when you're investing in people, making decisions on that side. Let's switch gears now, and let's talk about another Robert Half study. This one also is very recent. So as you can see, we're trying to give you the latest here. 27% of people feel their career has stalled since the pandemic. The number of people feeling burnt out has gone up to 43%, up 10% since last year. And 28% have experienced a change in sentiment toward their work and want to leave their job. Think about that, over a quarter. 49% of employers put promotions on hold, 61% concerned about increased turnover. That's these last two on the employer side. It's kind of ugly, right? There's some tough stuff here. And we already know that our biggest issue is finding and attracting and retaining people. And look at the circumstances we are dealing with. We'll save some get your feedback on some of that in just a few minutes as I flip through a few last slides here. Hiring tools to help with some of this, because the challenge is how do you find good people in these crazy times? Well, here's the challenge. And I'm sorry, I jumped ahead on you too fast. Let me explain something first. The thing is that when somebody interviews for a job, they come in with their resume. Okay, how accurate is their resume? It's their best, they're always putting their best foot forward. Their references are always to people who are going to say the nicest things about them. And research suggests that, 2/3 of a person's true makeup, personality, everything sits below the waterline like a big iceberg. You're only seeing the top third. And so what can you do to find out, better data on who they are really? Normative psychometric assessments help us do that. And that was the next slide that I intended to go to. A study done by Harvard several years ago, this is in a low turnover industry, said that, look, if you're hiring people without an assessment, you will experience 5 times higher turnover than if you use a high quality normative psychometric assessment. That's the difference. Can you imagine all the cost of hiring somebody and there's a 5 times likelihood of not keeping them for 14 months when you are hiring them based on gut? If you use some objective tools, low-cost objective tools, you increase the likelihood of having them. So why do I mention this? Once again, you're getting their opinions. They're answering the assessment, and they can't fake these things very well because there are ways to test the accuracy of what they're answering. And then from that, you're comparing them to a large pool of data. From up to millions of people have done these assessments, and then from there you're in a position to make decisions. Okay, very, very quickly. If this was a normative psychometric benchmark on one scale, on the diplomatic versus independent scale, and they so people that were, the global pool of people that were put into this data pool, if we have a benchmark that we've created for the job that says the ideal candidate will score between 5 and 8 on this scale, and the person scores a 6, then you say, okay, you know what, on this scale, they're a good candidate. If they scored a 2, you can say, you know what, on this particular scale, that could be a problem. And there are about 17 scales that we're looking at in these reports, but you can use these as part of your decision making, and then it gives you something called an overall job suitability score, which helps you when you're determining hiring. Again, opinions to data to decisions. Great ways to take these ideas into everyday work life, right? Okay, just wrapping up here. We've got some free surveys that I wanted to talk about. The purpose here today is to give you some tools you can use, I always like to say. And so there are a couple of things here that you might be interested in. And the first one is something we call the executive core. So if you are a leader in an organization and would like to try this out, you can reach out to us, and we're going to talk about how you can do that in a little bit. But you can reach out to us, and we'll help you test this. Not test it, actually do it. It's really quick, 12 questions. And what we'll do is we'll actually give you 2 reports. The first one compares your scores, which would be the ones in blue, to an average of other executives. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So you'll see how you compare to other executives who've done the survey. And the second one is comparing all executives like you to anybody who's ever answered these questions in, we have thousands of people that have responded to our surveys. And so, how do you compare to our big data pool in terms of your scores relative to their scores? So these are fictitious samples I have here just to show you. In this case, the executives would be in blue and the employees would be in the orangey color. So that's the kind of thing we have for you, but we can do a live one for you if you're interested. This one is a surprise. Nobody on this call, either TAC or otherwise, has seen this. This is our brand new to be launched very soon. We already had a business size up tool that measures a business in 5 key areas: strategy, leadership, sales growth, employee engagement, business transition for businesses who are looking at transition and succession. And it measures them in all 5 areas. The data that's in there, those 4 blue bars, that's just fictional. I just got this like minutes before this presentation today, and I dropped it into the PowerPoint so you can see what's coming. This is going to be pretty cool, and there's actually going to be another surprise coming with it very soon as well. So that's a business size up. We can do that for free for you as well, which helps you from a planning perspective. This one, the Employee Pulse, is on our website. You can go to our website, do this for free, and helps you measure what is your cost of performing versus underperforming employees. This one takes a little bit of explanation, and I'm not going to bore you to tears on it. But the idea is you plug in a bunch of numbers. They're confidential to you. You put them in, and you just put in ballpark numbers. We're not asking for a deep dive into salaries and stuff like that, but it will actually do a calculation for you. I'm happy to help you do it. Anybody who wants to do it, myself or one of my fellow coaches, we're all happy to help you with it. It's a real simple exercise, and we'll show you, what percentage on $1 million of payroll, what percentage of that is underperforming. Typically, it's north of 25% of every dollar is an underperforming dollar. So it's pretty significant. And I strongly recommend take a few minutes to do it. I think you'll find it pretty cool. Okay, I now want to turn this over to Q&A. And I think what I will do is, let's do this just for the sake of time. And I am actually turning on the mic for attendees. But Judy, have there been any chat items that have come up over the last 45 minutes or so?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Well, I have turned the mic on for anybody. Any questions or comments from anybody regarding your own experience working with data in your own businesses? I know I have a couple questions, so I'm not shy to ask you. I did want to, one person, a couple people crossed my mind right away, but one person that crossed my mind I was thinking of yourself, and I know that you're a fan of data. You and I have kidded about that before. And when you think about, your own business planning, any best practices or things from your own experience that you've tended to employ. You're in a very data-driven business. Am I correct?
Yes. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Yes, I am personally a very data-oriented person, and I think we've come across on multiple projects where I've showcased that. But in terms of leadership, in terms of HR particularly, and I work with that, I haven't really used any tools. I've been going at it myself to identify candidates for retention and so forth, just because our expertise is very niche and what we look for is very particular. But as we grow locally, regionally, and internationally in the near future, within the next 12 to 18 months, this information will become very important, especially if we will be opening sites elsewhere. We would need to understand our current structure here and what we thrive on and how we can mimic that overseas. So this is something that is in the near future, I'm going to start digging into data collection to better understand who we are here and how we can develop similar environments elsewhere. So this is very timely for me, and thank you for asking me.
Oh gosh, no, well, no, thank you. No, that's great. Well, and I know that Artie, I know that I have the advantage of knowing some of you folks, and I know Artie, you're working for an incredibly dynamic, fast-growing business with international activity going on. How does your organization attack data collection and decision making? If you don't mind me putting you on the spot.
Mark, can you hear me?
I hear you great. Yeah, thanks, Artie.
I apologize. You completely dropped off. I have no idea what you asked me, but I'll try and answer anyway.
Oh, okay. No,
I
not a
heard you
problem.
say something about working for a growing organization. So,
Yeah.
yes, we are growing quite rapidly at the moment. So, data for us is a front and center initiative right now where in some of our scientific areas, obviously data plays such a big part, but I particularly am interested in how we can measure from an HR perspective. Metrics in HR, I think, is where we're trying to focus our energies. Something that you said earlier, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on. I find myself in a situation right now having to try to measure the improvement of communication skills, for example. And it's tricky. It's really hard. It's such a subjective thing to try to measure.
Yeah.
I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. I mean, my mind goes immediately to like surveys, for example, feedback, do like a baseline survey and then do some improvement thing that's going to improve people's communication skills and then measure again by doing another feedback survey, let's say. But if you've got any thoughts on that, I'd be very interested to hear.
Well, you just hit some of them for sure. We talk about the whole area of perceptive analytics because, your perception in terms of how much have you improved. And I apologize because I'm going to give this a very quick answer because I'm sure you and I could probably have a better conversation on it in more detail. The idea that there's this terrible term we all deal with called latency, right? And people will think that we've moved heaven and earth to get better at something. I worked for a company and they decided to do the Hewitt top 50 survey once, and we were a national company. We did it for the first time. We scored 26 out of the top 50, first time we ever tried, and we thought we were pretty good. And at the time when we were getting our debrief, they said, but you got to work on communication. You need to get better at that. So we went nuts as a leadership team on improving communication. We really focused on doing that better over the course of the year. Next year, we do the survey again, and we fell to 51st on the top 50. So we fell right off, and communication was identified again as our gap. And we're going, well, how can this be? Because we did all this work on it. Latency was what got us. So Artie, if I can just sort of say the one thing that we have learned, and you nailed it when you were talking about this idea of we use a term called expected results. And so there are the things that you can actually measure, like the number of times I did this, or whatever. And that works for certain things. But for soft things like communication, sometimes perceptive analytics are a better gauge in terms of the how do people feel. So if you said, okay, you know what, we got a 6.5 out of 10 in terms of timeliness of communication, for instance, as an example, and then they they measure it again a year later, and we move to a 7.5 out of 10. Our goal was to get to an 8. Okay, we made progress. So using perceptive analytics is a very common tool that we use. There's some other stuff you and I could talk about offline on that too, Artie, that I've lived your pain.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Well, listen, folks, I'm a firm believer in keeping things on time, and you have been great. I appreciate the number of attendees here today. We do have one last thing for you, and I kind of touched on it. There is we're calling it a special offer. It's not a sales pitch. It's we're going to offer you. We talked about some tools that you can use. It costs you nothing, and we want to make those available to you. So there will be communication for you after this event, and that some of it will roll out right away. Some of it might actually take us a few days or so, because some stuff is being rebuilt and is so new that we want to make sure it's ready to go. But you'll get communication from us. I want to thank you all for your time today, and stay safe out there as the markets reopen, and whether you're a hybrid office or an at-home or an at-work office, whatever your deal is, enjoy, and we'll see you soon.